Hello, I'm going to talk about the Conservation Buffer Initiative program today. This is an information session on how to fill out the application and go over what supporting documents are needed. As you can see on the screen, here is a Conservation Buffer Initiative program overview. Applications are accepted on a first come, first serve based on availability of funds. The application will be completed by the Soil Conservation District staff with the assistance of the applicant. Maryland's 2025 Conservation Buffer Initiative provides financial incentives for farmers and landowners to create or improve conservation buffers along waterways, helping to reduce soil erosion, protect water quality, and enhance habitat. The program supports two primary buffer types: watercourse access control, which is listed at the top here with livestock exclusion fencing for pastures adjacent to streams. And grass and forest buffers for cropland adjacent to streams. The option for highly erodible land or hydric soils was designed specifically for fallow farm fields with no cropping history, where the farmer had retired the field but now wants to plant crops and is willing to install a new buffer adjacent to cropland and a stream. Payments vary based on the buffer width, land type, pasture or cropland, and whether the buffer is newly established or existing. Tree-based buffers qualify for an additional $1,000 per acre bonus, and agreement terms range from 5 to 10 years. While fencing costs are not covered, farmers may seek funding through the Maryland Agricultural Cost Share or MAX program, or they could use the money that they receive from their 75% payment once their Conservation Buffer Initiative application is approved and once the agreement is signed. Eligible buffer widths range from 10 feet to 100 feet, with narrow or wider grass buffers, as well as forest buffers requiring tree planting. Pasture-based watercourse access control buffers do not receive payments for existing buffers. There's no payment up atop here under existing payment. While cropland-based grass buffers qualify for a $500 per acre existing buffer payment once the buffer is verified. Riparian buffers with trees have longer-term agreements but higher financial incentives. Farmers must apply for the program with land meeting the definition of a working farm, where buffers address nutrient runoff or soil erosion concerns. So let's go over how to fill out an application. And I'm just going to go ahead and do this along with you. So you would put in this federal identification number, and it's usually going to be a 9-digit number. And then the conservation district. In this case, I'm just going to use Anne Arundel. And the phone number, I'm just going to put the Conservation Grants phone number. And then you would put the customer's email address and the customer phone number, and then the name and address of the person or entity to receive the check is going to be whatever name they use when they file their taxes. So in this case, I'm just going to put Ice Cream Trail LLC, and then you would put the care of whoever the contact is for the entity, and then the address. In this case, the example is Maryland Department of Agriculture, so the city is Annapolis, and then the zip, and then the county again would be Anne Arundel. And then I'm just going to use a sample property ID from Caroline County. And I know that's not on Arundel County, but it's just a sample. And then you mark if there's a current soil and water quality plan and a current nutrient management plan. And then put the year you plan to start the project and the when the applicant is going to finish the project. So say it's May of 2025 to start the project and June of 2026 to finish the project, or May of 2026 to finish the project, and then make sure they sign and date the application. If it's a tenant, they sign and date the application, and then the landowner has to sign and date the application as well. And at the bottom of the application, you can see a description of the resource improvement codes and what the description is. And I'll go over that in a little more detail when we do the claim for payment training. So going back to the signatures, if it's a trust with 12 trustees, we would need 12 signatures on the agreement. It's okay to get the applicant to sign the application, but all titled landowners would have to sign the agreement. And now we're going to go to the practice code section of the application. As I mentioned, I will show examples of the RI sheets or resource improvement sheets in the claim for training video. In this case, we're going to do an RI 8, and it's going to be an establish. And I'm going to put a farm and tract number. And then the estimated buffer acres, I'm going to put 2, and that would be $4,000. And then they're going to do an RI 10 and improve. And it's the same farm and tract number. And it's going to be just 0.25 acres, which is $1,000. So their total payment, as you can see down below, is $5,000. And they would get 75% of that amount up front after the agreement is approved and signed. So that would be $3,750. And then they'd get an additional $1,250 or less for the 25% payment, if indeed they, for some reason, can't plant the full 2 acres or the full 2¼ acres, then the second payment is going to end up being less. And then you would have the Soil Conservation District Manager sign and date the application right here. And then moving on to the Certificate of Resolution form. I'm going to clear that. And moving on to the Certificate of Resolution form. This is for applicants that have an entity name. So you would want to put the name of the entity at the top. Let's see. And then in this case, it would be Ice Cream Trail LLC, the federal identification number here, and then print the applicant's name. And then for the signatures, have them print their name and sign after that, so the name is legible, and put their title, whether it is president or manager, and the date. So that is how to fill out the Certificate of Resolution. I'm going to now show the W-9 tax form, and I filled this in ahead of time since it is not a fillable PDF form. If it's an entity, you want to put the entity name on line 1. And in this case, I'm using Ice Cream Trail LLC. And then on box 3, you check partnership or limited liability company. And then you're going to put the address of the entity and the city, state, zip. Leave line 2 blank, please, or box 2. And I'm also providing an example. Let's see, and then fill out their federal identification number and sign the form and date the form. I just put my signature as an example, but obviously you would put the applicant's signature. And then for an individual W-9, I just made up a name, Mary Ann York, and she is an individual. So you would mark individual under line 3, leave box 2 blank. And then I made up an address, Summer Lane in Denton, Maryland, 21629. And then you would use her individual social security number and then have her sign and date the form. Going back up to the top, if they do not use their middle name, if they only use their middle initial, then you would put Mary A. York. So it's important that they put the name on the W-9 exactly as they file their taxes. And then on the next page with the application, we would like a map. In this case, you can see that the blue is a field buffer. It's an RI8, which is a grass buffer adjacent to a stream. And then the green is an RI5, which is a grass buffer adjacent to a pasture and a stream. And this map gives the acres of the buffer and the crop boundaries. We also want the property tax ID for the premise address, the farm and tract number, the acres. It would be nice to know the width of each buffer in feet and the location of any streams, the location of any cropland or pasture, and the property boundary. I do have a list here of what we want on the map: property tax ID, farm tract number, premise address, acres of each buffer, width of each buffer in feet, kind of buffer, in other words, the resource improvement code, location of any streams, location of any cropland or pasture, and tract boundary. And then here's a copy of the nutrient management certification page. What we need on there is the farm operator name, email, and phone number, so we can contact them if we have any questions. And then I have included an example of a SDAT real property form for a Department of Natural Resources property as an example for the purposes of this training. In this case, it's a real property data search. It's Caroline County. It gives the district code at the top and the account identifier. It tells the number of acres of the property, the map, and the parcel number. It also is going to show, in this case, the deed reference. Is Liber 160, folio 65. And sometimes you have to go to that deed and then look for references to any other deeds in that deed to trace the ownership back in case there's a life estate with remainderment, or in case you need to ask them if it's a trust. And then we're going to go on to the applicant's checklist. You want to put the applicant's name, the farm name, the property tax ID, the name of the soil conservation district, the date you submitted the application, and then you can check off that you have an application with signatures, that you've entered the correct resource improvement codes on the application. If it's an existing buffer, let us know the condition on the ground and provide color maps. I went over what I want on the map. And then you make sure you have provided the mailing address for the applicant. Leave the optional category blank on the application, the nutrient management certification form, the certificate of resolution, or the documents that tell us who is authorized to sign, which may be a trust agreement. And then we also need a signed W-9 tax form. And I also wanted to go over, we'll send a memo asking the Soil Conservation District staff to have each applicant read and sign the agreement on page 5. Each landowner must also sign the agreement on page 6. And once that has occurred, the Soil Conservation District manager will sign on page 5. And then you would mail the signed agreement back to us at MDA Conservation Grants. Once we receive the application, we approve it. We will fill out the agreement. So I wanted to show you a sample of what the agreement looks like. So here's a sample agreement. So the dot in purple is actually the date that the Secretary of Resource Conservation, Hans Schmidt, he will sign and date this agreement. And we use the date of his signature here in this spot. The only thing you're required to do is get all titled landowners to sign the agreement and the tenant if applicable. But I wanted to show you what the agreement looks like and go over a few points. So up here on the right, we have the agreement number, and then Conservation Grants will enter the applicant name, the county of the soil conservation district, and we would fill all this in, and the premise address for the buffer and the property account ID. And then we'll fill in whether it's a 5-year agreement for grass buffers or 10-year agreement for a forest buffer. And then just some things to point out that the landowner has to be in compliance with all nutrient management requirements, and they have to maintain an existing buffer according to the application, meeting the minimum resource improvement practice criteria as opposed to the NRCS standards, and then plant within 1 year from the date of the agreement, control invasive species and noxious weeds as required by law. Moving to the next page, to notify the department and the district of any change in agricultural operations during the buffer life which affect the buffer or its use, and to pay back the department the full amount of funds received under this agreement if the applicant fails to enhance, install, or maintain the buffer as provided under this article or for other reasons listed here. The district has to assist the applicant in the layout and planning of the conservation buffer and to review the claim for payment submitted by the applicant and certify whether it properly represents all eligible costs, and to provide itemized invoices or receipts if requested by the department. We will pay 75% of the amount indicated on the application form upfront once the application is approved and the agreement is signed. But remember, this grant amount is an estimate only and may be adjusted by the Department of Agriculture based upon the actual installed acres. So that's the agreement. And then we will check whether the applicant has a certificate of resolution or that we've received the application for the conservation buffer initiative. And then again, just a reminder, the applicant should not proceed with the construction or installing or planting the project until all parties have signed the agreement, including the Maryland Department of Agriculture, and until you get a copy of that signed agreement. So the applicant signs and dates the agreement, and then each titled landowner would also sign and date the agreement. So that's each landowner listed on the deed. And then I just wanted to go over the bonus form. We'll fill this out at Conservation Grants, but I wanted to point out a few things on this form. We use this form for the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, or CREP. We use this for the Conservation Buffer Initiative Program, the Maryland Agricultural Water Quality Cost Share Program, or MACS, and Healthy Soils also uses this form as well. So in this case, let's say it's a Conservation Buffer Initiative application, and the contract length is 10 years because it's trees, and the practice code is going to be an RI 10. And they planted 0.25 trees, so a 1/4 acre. They're going to get a $250 bonus for planting a tree buffer And we will send this bonus form out with the agreement if there's a riparian buffer, if there's a RI6 or RI10 listed on the application form. So I'm going to clear that. And again, just a reminder, you would have the applicant sign and date the bonus form. Then once we approve the application and once we receive the signed agreement back and Hans has signed the agreement, the district and the applicant will receive a letter in the mail and this letter shows that there's a fully executed agreement. Please review and retain a copy of a copy for your records. It also explains we'll be sending out a payment, and then if you have a riparian forest buffer and you've returned the bonus incentive form with your signature, then we will pay for that at the same time. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, Cyril Cousins at Conservation Grants, 410-980-6697 or 410-841-5945, or you can email me at cyril.cousins2@maryland.gov. Thanks so much and have a great day.